Well, McCory, thanks for being the very first guest on the Big Day podcast. I just want to say for everyone that's listening, I deeply, respect you as a photographer and a business owner, but and getting to know you over like the last 3 years or so, also as a person, and I think that's really important. I think this podcast will be really important for people and prove super valuable because you have a lot of wisdom in the industry. So thanks for being here. And how are you holding up with everything that's going down with COVID-19?
Yeah. Well, thanks, first of all, for the kind words. That's very kind of you to say. I feel honored and blessed to have had a business in the wedding industry and in photography for as long as I have. But yeah, COVID-19 is a day-to-day adventure. Every day it feels like I'm trying to figure something else out. And it's had plenty of lows and downs and stress, but there's some ups here and there too. So getting a lot of projects done. But it's been overall. It's been an adventure, uncharted territory for sure.
I'm sure. I think most of our listeners will want to jump into topics related to coronavirus. So we'll do that first, and then maybe afterwards we can talk about, just some general best practices in your mind for finding and hiring a photographer. So
sounds great.
Yeah. So first, I guess, tell me like a little bit about what photographers are going through right now. I think that's going to be helpful for couples to kind of like take that perspective and maybe like walk me through a timeline of like the last month or two of kind of like what's going on with photographers' minds during the whole coronavirus situation.
Yeah, the biggest thing is just the unknown right now. With weddings being on average about 150 people or so, it's, when will government regulations, when will the health departments allow groups of that size to meet again? So there's just a lot of unknowns around that. A lot of the big challenges have just been how to manage clients as they're wanting to move dates, as they're wanting to cancel, totally change their plans and aren't including us in that anymore, and just trying to figure out what's fair to both sides. Both based off of previous experience where we've run into cancellations or reschedules, but also related to contracts, and just trying to make sure that, everybody's being watched out for, and at the end of the day that everybody feels like they're being cared for and, are getting a good end of the bargain, so to speak. For us as a small business, having those payments, when you get deposits or booking fees, you're not taking that money and just putting it into savings on the chance that you might not shoot that event someday. We are a very seasonal business, so those monies are what allow you to get through the off seasons, to continue paying your bills and be able to offer those services for the next summer. And so those fees are very important because it guarantees the client that they have you for that date, but it also guarantees you that you have income coming in during those slower months, allowing you to pay your bills, pay rent and utilities and employees and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. I think that'll be useful for couples to kind of put themselves in the shoes of the photographer to kind of see it from your point of view in their dealings with, talking with you and other photography studios. Taking the reverse side of things, if you were a couple right now that had hired a photographer and had planned a wedding, and you were considering postponing your wedding as the information comes in, the new information, what are some of your, like if it was you, what would some steps be? What would the first steps be in general to postpone or consider postponing, and in dealing with your photographer?
Yeah, I think the first place to go is your venue. I mean, the venues are kind of at the head of things as far as their location, where they are within, the state, county. Also, even if you're just having it at a private location, even a home, if there are health regulations in place from a on a state level or a county level, those apply to everybody. It doesn't just apply to a professional wedding venue. It also applies to a private residence, even if you're having it in the backyard. So I think the first thing is to look at what those are and try and kind of figure out what can happen as far as your wedding timing wise and all that. The other thing is to really, I think the easiest thing is to stick with the vendors you have. You put a lot of work into finding the right people. You don't want to have to go through that process again. And we've had people that are getting married in another state now because things didn't work out. Overall, keeping those same vendors when you can will take off a lot of stress. There may be some additional expense here and there in that, like if you have to fly a photographer out. But most people and most vendors want to continue working with you. They want to continue that relationship. Obviously, they're planning on the income. And so you're able to both support small businesses and reduce stress in your life by sticking with as many of the same vendors as you can.
Sure.
We're trying to make it easy for people to reschedule, but there are vendors that are charging fees for rescheduling. I think that's understandable because a lot of times you'll be taking a date that they would have had another wedding booked for the next year. So we're not personally taking rebooking fees, but I know of companies that are, and I do think that it's fair. We're just trying to avoid that if we can.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point there. I mean, generally venues, that's the thing that I think I personally would recommend most couples tackle first. And I think that's probably in the front of the minds of most couples, is kind of making sure the venues are, their venue is available on a date that they might want to postpone to, but then maybe like prioritizing, like, hey, I mean, I have some couples where they're like, video is really important to us. And so maybe prioritizing video to see if that vendor is available, or photography if that's important to you, and kind of like taking it from there maybe might be a good process.
I think creating a priority list and making sure that you can have as many of the vendors there that you had based off of that list. If your DJ wasn't that important to you, then if they're not available for the date, maybe that's where you find somebody else, or maybe that's photography. But whatever that list is for you, finding, the people that you want there the most where it can work. And obviously that plays a role with your guests too, whether people can actually attend that date, things like that, especially with immediate family stuff, all of that.
Yep. Yeah, I really feel for our couples right now, because as the information changes, maybe like 150 people said they could attend 2 weeks ago, but now there might be 100 people. So they're constantly sort of like maintaining that wedding list, which dictates almost everything else.
Yeah, here in Colorado, where we have so many destination weddings, a lot of it's going to come down to when people are comfortable flying again, when they're comfortable getting on a plane and knowing that they can travel across the country and not have to worry about their health.
Yeah, yep, makes sense. At Majestic, we're getting a lot of questions, and I'm sure Elevate is too, about refund and postponement policies. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and if you're comfortable sharing what Elevate's policy is, and also just sort of like your mindset behind the policy.
Yeah, so our policy is that when you initially book, you give us $500 to reserve the date. Because we are reserving that date for your wedding, we don't return that money. And that's because we have to start turning away work for that potential date. And so it allows us that assurance that we're going to be working that day. So with rescheduling, obviously that changes all of that. So our typical policy is that we require the remaining 50% 90 days out from the wedding, and then the final 50%. So your full final balance is due 30 days before the wedding. And then if there's anything added on in that period of time, like additional time on the wedding day, we invoice you after the wedding and get that payment before we send you all the final image files and all that. So in this situation, what we're doing is any payments that have been already taken, we are not returning because it falls within that period of time. So if you've given us that initial booking fee, then we are not returning that. If you've paid and are less than 90 days out, we are not returning that. But we are happy to take any fees that have been paid towards services and use those towards your rescheduled date. So we're not trying to take anybody's money. We are just trying to keep afloat, basically, by keeping the fees that we have to pay the bills that we have, and then we will offer those services whenever that wedding or event is rescheduled down the road. We are not charging any additional fees for the rescheduling. We know our clients are in a tough position going through all this and having to deal with all of it, and we want it to be as easy as possible from our perspective. But at this time, we are not returning any fees.
Mm-hmm. I hear, I was on a conference call the other day with one of the larger wedding organizations, and I heard about people that are actually charging fees to, like, say if you have a Saturday that was booked this year and you want to book a really popular Saturday next year, they're charging fees. Sounds like you're not doing that. What's your mindset behind doing that, I guess?
Yeah, it really comes down to people have budgeted a certain amount for their wedding. I feel like there's a lot of financial stressors just in the economy right now. And the last thing I want to do is make life more stressful for my clients by having them have a bunch of costs show up that they weren't expecting relative to the coronavirus. If they were booking and were just rescheduling just because they decided, yeah, this date isn't working for us anymore, we would probably approach it differently. But given the current situation, we're just trying to make life as easy as we can on them. Even though I don't disagree with the people that are charging fees to rebook. Obviously, they're taking some risk in that the client isn't willing to pay those fees and will just move on. But, everybody's just trying to make sure that they can pay their bills at the end of the day. Nobody's getting rich through any of this.
Yeah. For our couples that are listening, have you talked to a lot of other vendors, and is your policy to sort of, charge no fees, carry your wedding into 2021, make it super easy? Is that pretty consistent with what you've heard from other vendors, or is it more almost lenient? Or I'm just curious because I know you're a member of one of the larger wedding organizations as well. So
yeah, it's really all over the board. There's places that are just saying, we're not giving anything back. If you want to reschedule your wedding, you've got to pay as if you're booking a new wedding. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum with companies like ours that were allowing them to transfer with no fees. So it's really a wide range. And a lot of it is handled differently by industry too. And I just don't know enough, for caterers, for venues, for florists, how they're all handling it individually. But I do know it's a really wide range. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that you or any of the photographers are hearing right now that you think would be helpful for some of our listeners to know about? Any couples that are either planning a wedding or have already planned a wedding?
Yeah, the big thing is, how do you have a wedding now with the social distancing and all that in place? When you're once we're allowed to have 50, 100, 150, 250 people at a wedding, which will happen, we'll get back to normal. It's just the time frame of that. But when that stuff starts happening, how do you approach social distancing throughout your wedding day? I think that needs to be a serious conversation. probably primarily with your photographer. The caterers will have regulations and all that in place. And I'm sure the venue will be very clear about how you handle the dance floor, things like that. But your photographer and videographer become really important as far as how close can you get to your maid of honor or best man, or how do you approach those things? Because as it is right now, if you're coming from separate households, you're supposed to social distance and say 6 feet apart. How do masks come into play? Obviously, you don't want everybody wearing a mask in all their photos, but during the reception, that might be a requirement of having proper social distancing and safety requirements in place, that people have to wear a mask when they're moving about a venue. I'm sure you wouldn't be able to do it while you're eating, but maybe for dancing you're required to wear a mask or something. How does that look from a photography standpoint? And honestly, it's all uncharted waters for all of us. And so we're figuring out a lot of it, but I think that's a really good discussion to have, is just be open and honest about your concerns. And if you work together as a team, hopefully you can come up with some answers that will find the best case scenario given the circumstances.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll see like a lot of group photos on walls of homes in like the next coming years, where you'd be like, oh, you have a mask on in your photo? You must have gotten married in 2020. It'll be interesting. No, hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I mean, the question is, like with family photos, like how do you keep distance from one family unit to another when you're trying to capture everybody, what does that look like? We're definitely not going to have wedding party, photos of 50 people on one side all standing right next to each other. So we're still trying to figure out how to manage all of that. And I think it's just got to be an ongoing conversation.
Yep. We're here in May right now. It'll be, I'm sure, in the coming months, in June and July, it'll be evolving for sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, now I'd like to move into some more general photography questions for couples that are looking to book maybe later 2020 or even into next year, just some general photographer questions. I want to talk a little bit about budget. Every wedding has a budget, and what is like the typical like percentage, if you will, or amount, if a wedding has X amount of dollars they spend, that is spent on a photographer, and sort of owning a photography studio, I'm sure you have a little bit of bias, but what would you recommend spending on a photographer?
Yeah, it's usually 10% of your overall wedding budget. Okay. That's what you find when you look at the budget apps and websites and stuff that are out there. The Knot provides one. It's usually 10% of your budget that you're putting towards that. Obviously, we see a wide range. We see small weddings where we're well over 10% of their budget. But we also see really big weddings or really fancy weddings at nicer venues where we're much less than 10% of their budget. So it can range, but 10% is a good number to start with relative to your overall budget. Yeah.
And is that a 10% budget, is that combined for creative from your experiences? In other words, is that the combined photo and video budget, or is that just for photography? Or
it depends on where you see it. It's usually combined. Most of the times I've seen it as combined. And that's where you get into the dilemma for people of, do I spend all of that 10% on photography, or do I try and split that up between photo and video? We're seeing more and more clients obviously spending part of that on video. But if they're doing both at a high level, it's usually going to end up being more than 10% of their budget. The reality is it's probably more like 15% up to 18% of their budget if they're spending money on high quality photo and video for an average wedding. But for those couples, they've usually prioritized having both of them there over having either more guests or more flowers or whatever it might be. It's just personal preference.
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to looking for a photographer, I mean, if you're going through a venue, generally they'll have a vendors list, or if you've hired a planner, good for you. That's awesome and highly recommended, by the way. And then they'll have a recommended vendors list. But if you were just sort of on your own, starting from scratch, there are so many photographers out there now, and it's kind of like hard to sift through it all. How would you? What are some ideas for how would you go about starting your search? I guess other than like word of mouth, that's also powerful. If you were just like truly starting from scratch.
Yeah, if you don't have somebody that's referring you, obviously for referrals, the number one places to look are venues, other vendors you're working with, and past friends that have been married that have worked directly with that person. Those are always the best referrals because you know that they were a pleasure to work with, that they didn't just create pretty photos, but they were good people as well. If you are starting totally from scratch, the best thing to do is to go on one of the major websites like The Knot or a Wedding Wire or something along those lines, just to get a lay of the land, just to kind of see what's out there. You start getting a feel for the lower budget photographers, the higher budget photographers, start getting an idea of the overall. But then it's really starting to dig into the photographers that are in your budget, narrow it down by budget first, at least in a range. Don't go in thinking I've got a, $4,000 budget and I've got to meet that exactly. Give yourself a range, like give yourself 3,000 to 5,000 kind of thing, because you might find a photographer that you love at that $5,000 price point and you decide it's well worth it. Whereas if you had just looked at it 4,000, you would never talk to them. And it might be the opposite too. You might find a photographer you love at 3,000 that allows you to save money on your overall wedding budget and put it into other areas. So give yourself a range and then start really digging into those photographers. Go to their websites, look at their experience. You can get a good sense of how long somebody's been doing it for. Make sure you look at a full wedding. So many people can put their best foot forward, so to speak, and just show you portfolio shots. And if you've shot 50 weddings and you pick 3 great photos from each wedding, you've got 150 portfolio shots. That doesn't mean you did a good job of capturing that overall wedding. Maybe you're not a good storyteller. Maybe there's just a lot of missing spots in the photos. So make sure you're looking at an overall wedding as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point because with so many photographers flooding the market now and with people that are pretty good at building websites. Their websites are pretty, they're easy to build and look really nice. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So that's a really good point. Like just because somebody has some killer, like a couple killer photos doesn't mean that they could capture your wedding pretty well from start to finish. So that's a valid point.
I think the other really important thing to look at is reviews. People, when they take the time to write a review, it's usually because they really believe in what they're saying, whether they loved the service, hated the service, but they believe in it. And so to really go on and look at the photographer or any other vendor's reviews and really read through the last 20, 30 reviews, see what was said. People are usually honest too if they didn't quite do this like we expected, that sort of thing. So I think reviews are really important. And then the biggest and most important is meeting them. These days, that doesn't have to be in person. Obviously, in person's nice, but a video call or even just a good phone conversation can go a long ways in getting a sense for who they are and how they treat you and how they're going to treat other people on the day of your wedding. You want somebody that you're going to enjoy working with all day.
Yeah. I convey that to my couples as well. It's like, we're going to be with you on the biggest day of your life. We're going to be with you for more time than even like your closest friends are going to be. So it's super important that you kind of have a good vibe with that person and have a good rapport because you want it to be comfortable. It's your wedding day. So
totally.
Yeah. Great. I was going to get into a little bit about, what types of services and products do photographers typically offer? Obviously you have the hours and the coverage there, but what do photographers offer, and how do they vary in what they give you?
Yeah. Photography is simplified a lot with digital because that's been the key thing that most people are getting with their wedding package is the digital files. Yeah. So that can range a lot, though. So digging into that a little more and making sure you understand what you're getting is important because there are photographers out there that will give you just all the raw files, which may sound like a great thing. I get all the images, they're professional. There's a lot of work that goes into the imagery to make it look professional and doesn't make it look like it just came out of, your iPhone or point and shoot camera kind of thing. You want professional looking images, and today with digital, we're allowed to do a lot of things that can enhance and make images better, and you want to make sure that they've taken the time to do that. Getting all the files also isn't necessarily a good thing. There's usually thousands of photos taken, and you don't want to go through all of those. You don't want to go through all the blinks or the awkward looks, the outtakes, the double chins that accidentally happened. There's no reason for you to sort through all those. You're paying a professional to do that work for you. Let them do that work. Mm-hmm. So number one is the digital files, making sure that they're edited. Hopefully they're culled down to a certain amount to where you're not dealing with poor quality photos, because even professional photographers make mistakes. They miss shots. You just can't nail it every time. And then the other things that usually come into play, you have both the services and the product side. So there's different things from a service side, whether it's how many meetings you have before or after the wedding to make sure that everything's in place, or to provide the files to you, to present them to you. It can be, for us, we offer a service we call the day of show on the wedding day, where we actually show your photos to your guests on the wedding day. We edit them during the dinner hour. So there's additional services like that that can come into play. And then there's the final piece. So that's usually at the core digital files these days, but it can also be albums, prints. Mm-hmm. Some companies include a certain amount in their packages. Some everything's a la carte. Mm-hmm. We're kind of a mix of both. But we do feel like having something tangible that you can hang on the wall, put on a coffee table and flip through, go back to with your kids, your grandkids, have them pass down through the generations, like in a wedding album. Those things are important. Mm-hmm. So it just ranges from company to company, whether they include that or whether it's an addition.
Yep, got it. What are some other questions that you hear that come to mind from wedding couples that are looking for a photographer? Have I missed anything as far as just things that you've heard over the years, I guess, over and over again?
Yeah, number one, a lot of times is why are you guys special? What makes you unique? What makes you different? I think that's a great question. Photography style, you can see a lot in the overall feel just from looking at photos, whether it's bright and airy, dark and moody, or just the artistic style of the photographer, and I think that's important. But really getting to the core of the photographer and why they're a photographer. Why do they do what they do? Do they love weddings? Do they, get excited the morning of a wedding because they get to document that day for that couple? Or is it something that you get a sense that they're just doing to pay the bills? Mm-hmm. You want people that have a genuine passion. And so really getting to the core of that, like, why are you a wedding photographer? Why do you do what you do? I think can go a long ways in finding a photographer that's a good fit for you. And that's a common question, for sure.
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question, and I would actually have to think about that if someone caught me off guard in a call and asked me that. That's a really good, deeper question for sure. Talking about style, I think that this is something that couples don't always necessarily think through as far as you and I having been in the industry for a while, we see trends come and go. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about Elevate style, which I consider more timeless. It doesn't sort of like go with the flow. 2017 is more like dramatic. 2018 is light and airy. It sort of has this like more timeless quality to it.
Yeah. Yeah, we've worked hard on that over the years. I guarantee you there were times that we thought we were being timeless.
Yeah.
Now we look back on and it's a little more dated than we thought it was at the time.
Yeah.
Selective coloring comes to mind like 15 years ago. But yeah, I think the key for us is we look at these trends as big ups and downs that come and go. And the key for us is to try and stay level in the middle somewhere, where we don't want to become dated because we're not changing with the times, but at the same time we don't want to just jump on the latest trend. And then that takes a good balance to be able to figure that out and find that. I feel like we've done a really good job of that over the last, I'd say, 5 years or so, where we've finally kind of figured out how to follow those trends without totally changing our look and feel or going in a direction that's not true to us. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we really want you to look back at your photos and not be able to place the year, that sort of thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to date photos, whether it's your flower choices or the color of your bridesmaids' dresses or the decor you use during your reception, just because things change with time. But we want you to look at the photos and not feel like they're just straight out of, 2007 kind of thing. Like that was that year. We do want it to be more timeless, and we work hard at that. Ryan Erickson, who's one of our photographers, is in charge of our creative and making sure that happens. And he does a really good job with that.
Yep. Great. That's actually all I had. So
awesome.
Yeah. Thanks thanks so much for making time and being the first guest here. I hope it gets back to normal quickly and we can go grab a beer at a brewery, like be around other people soon.
Exactly. I think I'm missing that almost more than anything, is just getting together with friends over a beer and having a good conversation. Those aren't happening much these days. So thanks for having me, Chris, and just thanks for everything you do and the heart and soul you put into your video work. You do great work, and we love working with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So, all right, McCory James, Elevate Photography. Thanks again.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.